He was the man who had everything, a billion-dollar empire, a trophy wife carrying his heir, and a secret that could shatter it all. She thought she was living a fairy tale, but her prince was spending a fortune, not on their unborn child, but on his mistress. And not just on diamonds or designer clothes. He insured her hands for millions. While back home, his pregnant wife's prenatal bills were piling up unpaid. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a twisted saga of priorities, deception, and a discovery that will make your jaw drop. Get ready. Eleanor Vance lived a life most women only dreamed of. Her husband, Julian Vance, was a titan of industry, his name synonymous with cutting-edge technology and old money prestige. Their penthouse apartment on Park Avenue was a testament to his success with panoramic views of Central Park that Eleanor often found herself staring at, lost in thought. At 32, pregnant with their first child, a boy they'd recently learned, she should have been ecstatic. And she was about the baby. Julian, however, had become an increasingly distant constellation in her meticulously curated universe. Their courtship had been a whirlwind. Julian, charismatic and devastatingly handsome, had swept the then art gallery curator off her feet. He'd loved her discerning eye, her quiet intelligence, and the way she wasn't overtly impressed by his wealth, even though she appreciated the beauty and comfort it afforded. Now, 5 years into their marriage, the initial sparkle had dulled, replaced by a routine of polite dinners when he was home, charity galas, and the ever-present hum of his business empire. The pregnancy had for a brief time seemed to reignite something in him. He'd been tender attentive, his hand often resting on her burgeoning belly with a possessive pride that both thrilled and slightly unnerved her. But as the months wore on, his business trips became more frequent, his excuses for late nights more elaborate. The first crack in the gilded cage appeared subtly. Dr. Ramirez's office, one of the most respected obstetricians in New York, had called. A polite, almost apologetic voice informed Eleanor that her last 2 invoices for prenatal consultations and advanced screenings were overdue. Overdue? Eleanor had laughed, a light tinkling sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. There must be a mistake. My husband's office handles all our personal finances. I'm sure it's just an oversight. Of course, Mrs. Vance, the receptionist had replied, though a hint of doubt lingered in her tone. Perhaps you could just give them a gentle reminder. Eleanor had felt a flush creep up her neck. It was embarrassing. The Vances late on a medical bill preposterous. That evening she'd mentioned it to Julian, as he was loosening his Brioni silk tie. His shoulders slumped with a fatigue that seemed more than just work-related. "Prenatal bills, darling, don't worry your pretty head about such trivialities," he'd said, waving a dismissive hand. "I'll have Marcus sort it out first thing. Probably some new intern messing up the accounts payable." Marcus Thorne was Julian's long-suffering, hyper-efficient CFO, a man who rarely made errors. Eleanor had wanted to press further to ask why she was being called and not his accounts department directly, if they usually handled it. But Julian had already moved on, scrolling through messages on his phone, his face illuminated by the cool blue light, making him look like a stranger. A week later, another call came. This time, the tone was firmer. "Mrs. Vance, we still haven't received payment. We value you as a patient, but we will need to settle this account before your next appointment, or we'll have to discuss alternative arrangements." The humiliation was a cold knot in Eleanor's stomach. Alternative arrangements. For Eleanor, Vance, wife of Julian Vance. It was unthinkable. She paid the outstanding amount immediately using her personal credit card, the one Julian topped up monthly for her allowance, a term she despised, but had learned to live with. The sum wasn't astronomical for them, a few $1,000s, but the principle of it stung. Why had Julian, or rather Marcus, not handled it? She tried to tell herself it was an oversight. Julian was building a new European headquarters in Berlin. He was under immense pressure. But a seed of unease had been planted, and it was beginning to germinate in the fertile ground of her growing isolation. Her best friend Chloe, a sharp-witted lawyer who'd been Eleanor's maid of honor, listened patiently over matcha lattes. "It's weird, Elle. Julian's not exactly strapped for cash, and Marcus Thorne. That man's a bloodhound for financial details. For him to miss something like this, twice unlikely." "So what are you saying?" Eleanor asked, tracing the rim of her cup. "I'm saying it's either deliberate, which is cruel and bizarre, or something's distracting Julian so much that even his usually meticulous systems are failing, and frankly, neither option is great." Chloe's gaze was direct. How is he otherwise still distant? Eleanor nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "More so. He was in Milan last week. Said it was for a tech conference. But when I called the hotel he supposedly booked, they had no record of his stay under his name, or even Vance Industries." Chloe raised an eyebrow. "Did you confront him?" "He said it was a last-minute change, stayed at a colleague's private residence. His explanations are always plausible, always smooth. But they feel hollow." Eleanor sighed. "I hate feeling like this, Chloe. Suspicious, like a detective in my own marriage." "Sometimes, darling," Chloe said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand, "you have to be." The next incident was more alarming. Eleanor had gone for a routine ultrasound. The joy of seeing her baby boy strong and healthy was quickly overshadowed by the administrator at the front desk, asking her to settle the bill for the ultrasound suite and the radiologist's fee before leaving. This time her personal card was declined. The heat rushed to her face with such intensity, she felt faint. The administrator, a kindly older woman named Martha, looked at her with pity. "It happens sometimes, dear. Perhaps try another card." Eleanor fumbled in her Hermes Birkin, her hands shaking. She knew her other cards linked to the same central account managed by Julian's office would also be declined. She had some emergency cash, but not enough to cover the substantial fee. I seem to have left my primary card at home." She stammered, the lie tasting like ash. "Can you bill me?" Martha's smile became strained. "Normally Mrs. Vance, of course. But given the outstanding amounts on your general obstetrics account..." Eleanor felt like the floor was about to swallow her. Here she was, heavily pregnant in one of New York's finest medical facilities, unable to pay for her own baby's care. The irony was a bitter pill. Julian could buy a company on a whim, but he couldn't or wouldn't ensure his wife's medical bills were covered. She had to call Chloe, who immediately transferred the funds to Eleanor's account. The transaction, the hushed whispers she imagined from the staff, the pitying looks, it was all a fresh layer of torment. That night, Eleanor didn't wait for Julian to finish his work call. She walked straight into his home office, a sleek, minimalist space dominated by a vast mahogany desk. He was on the phone, speaking in fluent German, a language he used when he wanted to ensure she wouldn't understand. She stood there, arms crossed over her belly, until he finally glanced up, his eyes narrowing in irritation at the interruption. He held up a finger, indicating he'd be a minute. Eleanor didn't budge. When he finally hung up, his voice was cold. "Eleanor, I was in the middle of a crucial negotiation." "So was I, Julian," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Negotiating how to pay for our child's ultrasound because my card was declined. Declined, Julian. At Mount Sinai. Do you have any idea how that felt? He had the grace to look momentarily discomforted. Declined. That's impossible. I just transferred a significant sum to the household accounts this morning. He frowned, tapping at his keyboard. Marcus confirmed the transfer. There must be a technical glitch with the bank. This isn't the first time, Julian, Doctor. Ramirez's office has been chasing payments for weeks. I had to pay them myself. What is going on? Julian stood up, walking around the desk, attempting his usual tactic of soothing her with physical proximity and placating words. Darling, darling, calm down. It's not good for you or the baby to get so agitated. He tried to embrace her, but she stepped back. Don't you dare tell me to calm down, she seethed. This is beyond a glitch. This is neglect. Are we having financial problems you're not telling me about? He actually laughed, a short, incredulous bark. Financial problems, Eleanor. We're worth more than the GDP of some small countries. Please be serious. Then what is it? She pressed her eyes, searching his, looking for any flicker of truth. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you simply don't care enough to ensure these things are handled. His face hardened. That's a deeply unfair accusation. My entire life is dedicated to providing for this family. These are minor administrative errors, and I am deeply sorry you were embarrassed. It won't happen again. I'll call Marcus right now and have him triple-check everything. He made a show of picking up his phone, but Eleanor wasn't appeased. The ease with which he dismissed her concerns, the way he framed it as her overreaction to minor errors, was more infuriating than the incidents themselves. She left his office, the silence between them stretching taut and cold. Later that night, as she lay in their enormous bed, Julian's side conspicuously empty, he often claimed to work late in his study, Eleanor made a decision. If he wouldn't give her straight answers, she would find them herself. Her first port of call, Marcus Thorne. She wouldn't go through Julian. She'd approach Marcus directly. The next morning, she called Marcus's direct line, a number Julian probably assumed she didn't have. Marcus Thorne's office. Marcus, it's Eleanor Vance. I need to talk to you, urgently and privately. There was a slight pause. Mrs. Vance? Of course. Is everything all right? No, Marcus, it's not. And I have a feeling you might know why. Marcus Thorne agreed to meet Eleanor for coffee, away from the Vance Industries skyscraper and Julian's pervasive influence. He chose a discreet cafe in the West Village, a place where neither of them was likely to be recognized. Marcus was a man in his late 50s, impeccably dressed with kind eyes that currently held a distinct expression of anxiety. He'd been with Julian since the company's inception, a loyal soldier, but Eleanor had always sensed a fundamental decency in him that seemed at odds with Julian's more ruthless tendencies. Mrs. Vance. Eleanor. He began stirring his cappuccino with unnecessary vigor. I want to assure you the issues with the medical bill payments were rectified the moment Julian brought them to my attention yesterday evening. There was indeed a new clerk in accounts payable who misunderstood the coding for personal expenditure. A regrettable error, and I offer my sincerest apologies. Eleanor listened, her gaze unwavering. His explanation was smooth, too smooth, echoing Julian's own. Marcus, she said quietly, I appreciate you meeting me, and I appreciate the apology. But I don't believe that's the full story. Marcus avoided her eyes, focusing on his coffee cup as if it held the secrets of the universe. I'm not sure what you mean. My card was declined, Marcus, not just for a small copay, for a significant ultrasound bill. Julian said he'd transferred a large sum to the household accounts yesterday morning. Was that true? He hesitated. Yes, a standard monthly transfer was made. Standard, Eleanor pressed. enough to cover typical household expenses, staff salaries, my allowance. But perhaps not enough if there were other, unexpected, large personal expenditures draining the account. Marcus visibly paled. He finally looked up, his eyes troubled. "Eleanor, my position? My loyalty to Julian." "Your loyalty to Julian is precisely why I'm here," she interrupted, softening her tone. "You've known him for years. You know his patterns. Has there been anything unusual? Large, unexplained expenses? Payments to individuals I wouldn't know?" He sighed, a deep, weary sound. "Julian's personal expenditures are extensive. He has always maintained a separate discretionary fund, handled directly by him, not through my department, for things he deems private." "And has the activity on this discretionary fund increased lately?" Marcus ran a hand over his thinning hair. "Hypothetically speaking," he said, choosing his words with extreme care. "If such a fund were to see, say, a significant outflow for high-value, non-business-related assets or services, it might necessitate tighter controls on other personal accounts to maintain a certain liquidity preference Julian insists upon. He dislikes his primary personal accounts, dipping below a rather substantial minimum." Eleanor felt a chill. High-value, non-business-related assets or services, like what Marcus Art jewelry. He looked uncomfortable. "It's not my place to say. Julian is a private man." "He's my husband," Eleanor retorted, a new edge to her voice. "And I am carrying his child. His privacy is now directly impacting my ability to secure medical care. So with all due respect to his preferences, my baby's well-being trumps them." She leaned forward. "Marcus, I'm not asking you to betray Julian's confidence in a way that would jeopardize your career. But if there's something I should know, something that affects my family." He looked around the cafe, then leaned in slightly. "There have been substantial payments made regularly to an entity, a consultant, supposedly, for specialized services. The sums are considerable, enough to, shall we say, make one look twice." "A consultant? What kind of consultant?" "The invoices are coded very vaguely. Artistic consultation, performance expertise, things of that nature. And the recipient—" Marcus hesitated for a long moment. "The payments are routed through a shell corporation, Argent Services, LLC. But the ultimate beneficiary, according to the internal memos Julian occasionally dictates for his private files, is a Ms. Seraphina Dubois." The name meant nothing to Eleanor. "Seraphina Dubois," she repeated. "Have you ever met her?" "No, never. She's a ghost in the machine as far as the official company records are concerned. All correspondence is digital encrypted." Eleanor's mind raced. Artistic consultation, performance expertise. It sounded like a flimsy cover. "Marcus, is there anything else? Any specific large one-off payments recently?" He seemed to wrestle with himself. Then in a low voice he said, "Several months ago, there was a significant wire transfer from Julian's private fund, not to Argent Services, but directly to an overseas account. The memo line was unusual. It simply read, 'Premium SD Asset Protection.'" He paused. "It was routed through a broker known for specializing in high-risk, high-value insurance policies. Policies placed with underwriters like certain syndicates at Lloyd's of London." Lloyd's of London. Eleanor knew the name. They insured legendary jewel singers' voices, athletes' limbs. "Asset protection," she murmured. "SD for Seraphina Dubois." Marcus just looked at her, his expression pained. He had given her all he dared. Eleanor left the cafe with a polite thank you, her mind a whirlwind. Seraphina Dubois, Argent Services, an insurance policy from Lloyd's. The pieces were disparate, confusing, but they painted a grim picture. Julian wasn't just being neglectful. He was actively diverting enormous sums of money, and it seemed this Seraphina Dubois was at the center of it. Back in the sterile opulence of her apartment, Eleanor felt a new resolve hardening within her. The hurt was still there, a raw wound, but it was now overlaid with a cold anger. She wasn't just a victim of neglect. She was a target of profound deception. Her first step was to Google Seraphina Dubois. The search results were surprisingly sparse for someone apparently commanding such large sums from Julian. There were a few mentions in European society blogs, mostly picture captions at charity galas in Monaco or St. Moritz, always on the arm of some fleeting continental aristocrat or aging industrialist. She was stunningly beautiful, in an exotic, almost ethereal way, with cascades of dark hair and strikingly pale eyes. Her hands in the few clear photos were long, elegant, always perfectly manicured. Artistic. Then Eleanor refined her search. Seraphina Dubois, pianist. Seraphina Dubois, musician. And there it was. A handful of articles, mostly in French and Italian, from niche classical music journals. Seraphina Dubois was a concert pianist. Not world famous, not a household name like Lang Lang or Yuja Wang, but respected in certain exclusive circles. Praised for her exquisite touch, her preternatural dexterity. Her hands. Her hands. Eleanor whispered the words, catching in her throat. Premium. SD asset protection. Could Julian have insured this woman's hands? The thought was so outlandish, so grotesquely theatrical that Eleanor almost dismissed it. Julian, for all his flaws, was a pragmatic businessman. Why would he insure a pianist's hands? Unless his connection to her was far deeper, far more valuable to him than Eleanor could ever have imagined. She needed proof, concrete proof. Remembering Chloe's earlier words, Eleanor knew her next call. Chloe had connections everywhere, including to some very discreet private investigators. Chloe, Eleanor said, her voice tight when her friend answered. I need that PI you mentioned once, the one who's good, very good, and very, very discreet. What's happened? Chloe's voice was instantly alert. I think Julian is having an affair, but it's more than that. It's complicated and expensive, and I think he's insuring her. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Insuring her what, Eleanor? Her hands. Eleanor said the absurdity of it, making her feel slightly hysterical. He's insuring his mistress's hands, Chloe, while my prenatal bills go unpaid. Another silence, then Chloe's voice grim and resolute. I'll make the call. You'll hear from him within the hour. His name is Michael Rourke. You can trust him. Michael Rourke was as good as Chloe had promised. He was a former NYPD detective with a quiet demeanor that belied a razor-sharp mind. He listened to Eleanor's story without interruption, his expression unreadable. When she mentioned Lloyd's of London, he nodded slowly. Those policies are intricate, he said, and usually ironclad in terms of privacy. But there are always paper trails, digital trails. People get sloppy even in high-stakes games. Eleanor provided Rourke with all the information she had. Seraphina Dubois's name, Argent Services LLC, the dates of the wire transfers Marcus had hinted at Julian's recent travel patterns. Rourke promised to be in touch as soon as he had anything concrete. The waiting was agony. Eleanor went through the motions of her life attending a prenatal yoga class, meeting her mother for lunch, feigning normalcy while a storm raged inside her. Julian was home more often now, perhaps sensing her withdrawal, attempting a semblance of attentiveness. He'd even brought her flowers, a massive bouquet of her favorite white peonies, with a note apologizing again for the billing fiasco. It felt like a mockery. A week later, Rourke called. "Mrs. Vance, I have something. It's confirmed. A policy was indeed taken out approximately 6 months ago, underwritten by a syndicate at Lloyd's. The insured party is Serafina Dubois. The insured assets are her hands. Policy value, $5 million. Eleanor sank into a chair, the phone slipping slightly in her grip. $5 million. The premium payments are substantial monthly, Rourke continued. Routed from a private Geneva bank account Julian Vance controls. The same account also funds Argent Services LLC, which in turn pays for a lavish apartment on the Quai aux Fleurs in Paris. For Ms. Dubois. Paris. Of course, where else would a concert pianist with insured hands reside? There's more. Rourke said, his voice gentle. Ms. Dubois, she's not just a pianist, Mrs. Vance. According to my sources, she's also Julian Vance's very established, very long-term mistress. For at least 3 years. Well before you were pregnant. Perhaps even before you were married. The words hit Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. 3 years. It wasn't a recent indiscretion. It was a parallel life. A carefully constructed deception that had been running concurrently with her own marriage. Her love, her trust, her future, all built on a foundation of lies. And the cruelest cut of all, he valued this woman's hands, these instruments of her artistry, and presumably his pleasure more than the health and well-being of his own wife and unborn child. The symbolism was as devastating as the fact itself. The phone clattered from her nerveless fingers. The apartment, once a symbol of her gilded life, now felt like a beautifully furnished prison. The silence was deafening, broken only by the frantic thumping of her own heart and the faint, innocent flutter of the baby moving within her. A baby whose father had made his priorities devastatingly, sickeningly clear. The rage came first, a white-hot inferno that threatened to consume her. Eleanor paced the vast expanse of their living room, the panoramic view of New York City, a mocking backdrop to her crumbling world. 3 years. He had looked her in the eyes, vowed his love, placed a ring on her finger, all while another woman held a significant insured place in his life. His hands. The sheer calculated audacity of it was breathtaking. Then came the pain, a deep aching sorrow that settled in her bones, making her feel heavy, ancient. How could she have been so blind? Were there signs she'd missed, rationalized away in her desire to believe in the fairy tale, Julian's frequent business trips to Paris, his sudden fluency in French, the expensive, unfamiliar lingerie she'd once found tucked away in his luggage and he'd dismissed as a gift for a client's wife that he'd forgotten to give. Each memory was now a fresh stab of betrayal. But beneath the rage and the pain, a core of steel was forming. She was pregnant. She had a child, to think about a child who deserved better than a father, capable of such profound duplicity, and a mother paralyzed by grief. Eleanor Vance might have been naive, but she was not weak. She needed a plan. A confrontation was inevitable, but it had to be on her terms, armed with undeniable proof. Michael Rourke had provided a detailed report, copies of bank statements obtained through means she didn't inquire about, surveillance photos of Julian and Serafina in Paris, looking undeniably intimate, and even a heavily redacted summary of the Lloyd's insurance policy, clearly stating coverage for the hands of Seraphina Dubois. The premium alone was more than her annual household budget. Eleanor decided the setting for the confrontation would be their upstate New York estate, a sprawling property Julian adored his sanctuary from the city. It was remote, private, and she thought grimly a fitting place to dismantle the facade of their perfect life. She waited for a weekend he had cleared supposedly to spend quality time with her before the baby arrived. She arranged for a catered dinner, his favorite dishes, the finest wine. She dressed carefully, not in maternity wear, but in an elegant silk dress from before her pregnancy that still just about fit a reminder of the woman he had courted, the woman he was betraying. Julian arrived on Friday evening all smiles and feigned solicitude. "Darling, you look beautiful. And this place, it's good to be here, just us." He kissed her a dry, perfunctory peck on the cheek that made her skin crawl. Dinner was a tense affair. Eleanor played the part of the serene, expectant mother, while Julian, oblivious, prattled on about a new acquisition, a breakthrough in AI, his voice booming with self-satisfaction. She watched him, really watched him, perhaps for the first time in years. The handsome face, now marred by deceit. The confident gestures now reeking of arrogance. After the main course, as the staff cleared the plates, Eleanor placed a slim, leather-bound folder on the polished mahogany table between them. "Julian?" she said, her voice calm, almost eerily so. "There's something we need to discuss." He looked surprised, then mildly irritated, his monologue interrupted. "Can it wait, Eleanor? I was just getting to the exciting part about the neural network integration." "No," she said firmly. "It can't wait." She pushed the folder towards him. "Perhaps you should look at this." He frowned, picking it up with a sigh. "What is this more household bills? I thought we'd resolved that." He opened it. Eleanor watched as his eyes scanned the first page. A surveillance photo of him and Seraphina, arm in arm, laughing, exiting a Haussmann building on the Quai aux Fleurs. His smile froze. His face just moments before, ruddy with wine and self-congratulation, slowly drained of color. He flipped to the next page, a bank statement detailing payments to Argent Services LLC. Then to the next, the Lloyd's policy summary. The silence in the grand dining room was absolute, save for the ticking of an antique grandfather clock in the hall. Julian's knuckles were white as he gripped the documents. He didn't speak for a long time, his gaze fixed on the damning evidence. Finally, he looked up. His eyes narrowed, his expression shifting from shock to a cold, controlled anger. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Does it matter?" Eleanor replied, her own calm unwavering. "Is it true?" He slammed the folder shut. "This is an outrageous invasion of my privacy. Have you been spying on me?" "Your privacy." Eleanor laughed, a brittle, humorless sound. "You talk to me about privacy when you've been living a double life for 3 years, when you've been funding a mistress in Paris, buying her affection with my security, with our child's security." "Don't be melodramatic, Eleanor. Seraphina is a friend, a talented artist whom I support. A friend whose hands you insured for $5 million. Eleanor shot back, her voice rising despite her best efforts. "A friend for whom you pay lavish apartment fees while your pregnant wife's medical bills go into arrears. What kind of friend is that, Julian? And what kind of husband does that make you?" He stood up, pushing his chair back violently. "You don't understand the complexities of my life, the pressures I'm under." "Oh, I understand perfectly now," Eleanor said, standing to meet his gaze, her hand protectively on her belly. I understand that you're a liar and a cheat. I understand that your priorities are so grotesquely skewed that you'd value a pianist's dexterity over the well-being of your own family." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "The prenatal bills, Julian. Was it an oversight, or were you diverting funds so aggressively to Serafina that you genuinely couldn't cover them without dipping into your precious reserves?" Julian ran a hand through his hair, his composure finally cracking. It was a temporary cash flow issue in that specific account. An accounting error. I told you Serafina's situation is complex. She needed support. Needed support? Eleanor's voice dripped with sarcasm. To the tune of millions. While I was being humiliated at Mount Sinai, unable to pay for an ultrasound. Do you have any idea what that felt like? He had the decency to look away. I apologized for that. It was a mistake. No, Julian, Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a steely whisper. It wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. You chose her over us, over our child. She picked up her wine glass, not to drink, but to anchor her trembling hand. The question is why? Why this elaborate deception? Why Serafina? Julian stared at her, his expression a mixture of anger, guilt, and something else she couldn't quite decipher. Perhaps a hint of desperation. Serafina. She understands me. She appreciates the sacrifices I make the world I move in. She doesn't make demands. The insult landed like a slap. Unlike your pregnant wife, who merely expects her medical bills to be paid, and her husband to be faithful. Those are quite the demands, aren't they? It's not like that, Eleanor, he said, his voice pleading now, the anger dissipating into a desperate attempt at damage control. I love you. This with Serafina. It's complicated. It got out of hand. Out of hand, Eleanor echoed. Insuring her hands for $5 million with Lloyd's of London is out of hand. No, Julian. That's meticulous planning. That's a statement of value. He sank back into his chair, defeated. What do you want, Eleanor? What do I want? She looked at him, this stranger who was her husband. I want the truth, all of it. No more lies, no more evasions. And then, her voice hardened. I want a divorce. The word hung in the air, stark and irrevocable. Julian looked stunned, as if the possibility had never even occurred to him. A divorce, Eleanor, don't be hasty. We can work through this. There's the baby to consider. I am considering the baby, she said, her hand still resting on her stomach. And he deserves to be raised in an environment of honesty and respect, not one built on lies and deceit. He deserves a mother who isn't a fool, and frankly he deserves a better father than you've shown yourself to be. Julian stared at her, his face ashen. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. Eleanor, armed with the truth, was no longer the pliable, trusting wife. She was a woman betrayed, but a woman who had found her strength. There's more, isn't there? She pressed, a sudden intuition striking her. This isn't just about a sordid affair. This feels bigger. That insurance policy, it's excessively extravagant even for you. Why, Julian? What aren't you telling me about Serafina Dubois? He looked away towards the dark windows, reflecting their strained images. She had leverage. Leverage? Eleanor's blood ran cold. What kind of leverage? Julian finally met her eyes, and in them she saw a flicker of genuine fear. She knows things, Eleanor. Things about my business. Things that if they came out could destroy everything I've built. The room seemed to tilt. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was something far more dangerous. The mistress with the insured hands wasn't just a lover. She was a threat, and Julian, the powerful titan, was caught in her web. And by extension, so was Eleanor. The revelation that Serafina Dubois held leverage over Julian sent a fresh wave of shock through Eleanor. It recast the entire affair, transforming it from a simple, albeit devastating betrayal into something far more sinister. The $5 million insurance policy for her hands suddenly seemed less like a lavish gift and more like a desperate appeasement, a shield against a looming threat. "What things?" Eleanor demanded, her voice low and urgent. "What does she know?" Julian paced the length of the dining room, his earlier bravado completely gone, replaced by a hunted look. "It goes back years, before I even met you, when I was first trying to get Vance Industries off the ground in Europe. I made some aggressive moves, cut some corners, associated with people I shouldn't have. And Serafina was involved. Not directly. Not then. She was connected to someone. A very powerful, very dangerous man in Monaco. Someone who helped finance my early expansion when legitimate banks wouldn't touch me. Serafina was his protégé, his confidant. She saw everything, heard everything." Eleanor felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. "And this man? What happened to him?" "He died a few years ago. Conveniently, some might say." Julian glanced at her, his eyes hollow. Serafina inherited more than just his art collection. She inherited his secrets, including my secrets. "So your relationship with her, it wasn't just an affair. It was a continuous payment plan, keeping her happy, keeping her quiet." Julian nodded miserably. "At first it was mutual attraction. She's captivating, intelligent. But over time, especially after her patron died, the dynamic shifted. She became demanding. The apartment in Paris, the allowance, the consulting fees for Argent services, it was all part of it. She framed it as her due for her discretion and loyalty. And the insurance on her hands, Eleanor pressed. Why that specifically? He let out a bitter laugh. That was her masterpiece. Her hands are her livelihood, her identity. She claimed that her association with me even discreetly put her at risk from my less savory past associates. She said if anything happened to her, or specifically her ability to play, she'd make sure her memoirs were published posthumously. Memoirs that would detail every questionable deal, every name. He stopped in front of Eleanor. The policy wasn't just to protect her hands, Eleanor. It was to protect me. A golden handcuff. If she's well taken care of, and her most prized assets are insured by me, she has a vested interest in my continued success and, more importantly, my silence. Eleanor sank back into her chair, trying to process the enormity of it. Her husband wasn't just an adulterer. He was compromised, possibly entangled in criminal activities, and beholden to his mistress. The unpaid prenatal bills now seemed like a cruel, almost insignificant footnote in a much larger, uglier story. He hadn't forgotten them. He had been too busy placating a woman who held his entire empire in her perfectly manicured hands. "So all this time," Eleanor said slowly, "while I was planning our nursery, you were managing a ticking time bomb. I wanted to protect you from it," Julian said, his voice barely a whisper. "I thought I could handle her, keep it separate from our life." "Separate?" Eleanor's voice rose with disbelief. "It is our life, Julian. Her shadow has been hanging over us, influencing your decisions, draining our resources, jeopardizing our future. Did it ever occur to you to come clean, to go to the authorities yourself if these past dealings were so damning? He looked at her as if she were mad, and risk losing everything. My company, my reputation. Be realistic, Eleanor. That was never an option. So your option was to betray your wife, neglect your unborn child's needs, and live under the thumb of this woman indefinitely. The argument raged on, circling the same painful truths. Julian, stripped of his usual defenses, tried pleading, then rationalizing, then even subtly threatening her about the consequences of a messy divorce and public scandal. But Eleanor stood firm. The trust was not just broken, it was annihilated. By dawn, an exhausted, fragile truce had been called. Julian agreed to Eleanor's demand for a divorce. He also agreed reluctantly to full transparency regarding his dealings with Serafina, but only with Eleanor and her lawyer, Chloe, whom Eleanor insisted be brought into the loop immediately. Chloe arrived upstate by midday, her expression grim but resolute, as Eleanor gave her a condensed version of the night's revelations. Marcus Thorne was also summoned, arriving pale and anxious, but clearly relieved that the charade was collapsing. The next few days were a blur of tense meetings in the estate's library. Chloe, a formidable negotiator, took the lead, grilling Julian and a reluctant Marcus about the extent of Serafina's influence and the nature of the secrets she held. It became clear that Serafina wasn't just a passive recipient of Julian's largesse. She was an active player, subtly manipulating him, always reminding him of what she knew. The artistic consultation and performance expertise invoices were indeed a sham, funneling money to her without raising too many red flags. The insurance policy is the linchpin, Chloe surmised after hours of discussion. It's not just about her hands, it's a symbol of her power over him. She likely insisted on Lloyd's of London for the prestige and the implication that Julian values her assets immensely. She even specified the syndicate she wanted it placed with, Marcus added quietly. One known for its discretion, but also its meticulous claim investigations. It was a power move. During a private moment, Chloe turned to Eleanor. What do you want to do about Serafina? Beyond the divorce, I mean. Julian is terrified of her. He'll probably keep paying her indefinitely. Eleanor thought for a long moment. A part of her wanted to expose Serafina to see her brought down. But another more pragmatic part, influenced by the tiny life growing inside her, knew that a protracted war with such a woman could be dangerous, messy, and ultimately harmful to her child. I want her neutralized, Eleanor said finally. I don't want her to have any hold over Julian that could indirectly affect my child's financial future or safety. If Julian is to pay support, I need to know that money isn't being siphoned off to Paris under duress. Chloe nodded. That's a smart objective. Direct confrontation with Serafina might be unpredictable, but we can use what we know. The plan they formulated was audacious. Julian, under Chloe's steely guidance, would contact Serafina. He wouldn't cut her off. That was too risky. Instead, he would propose a new arrangement, a final lump sum settlement, a golden handshake in exchange for a legally binding non-disclosure agreement and the relinquishing of any materials she possessed regarding his past. The leverage for this negotiation. The threat that Julian pushed to the brink by Eleanor's divorce proceedings was prepared to disclose everything himself, to initiate a controlled demolition of his own empire, thereby rendering her information, and by extension her power over him, worthless. He would claim he was choosing to come clean, to save his relationship with his child, painting himself as a repentant father. It was a high-stakes bluff. If Serafina called it, Julian could indeed lose everything. But Chloe suspected Serafina was more pragmatic than vengeful. Her primary motivation seemed to be luxurious self-preservation, not necessarily Julian's outright destruction, which would kill her golden goose. Julian, desperate, and seeing no other way out that didn't involve complete ruin or continued servitude, agreed. The call to Serafina was made from the library, with Eleanor and Chloe listening on speakerphone, a silent, unseen audience. "Serafina, darling." Julian began his voice, attempting its old charm, though it was laced with an undeniable strain. "Julian." Her voice purred back, accented and smooth as silk. "To what do I owe the pleasure? More trouble with the missus?" Eleanor flinched. "Something like that," Julian said, taking a deep breath. "Things have escalated. Eleanor knows about us. She's filed for divorce." A slight pause. "Oh, how unfortunate for her, and for your burgeoning family. What does this mean for our arrangement?" Her tone was cool, businesslike. "It means things have to change," Julian said, Chloe subtly prompting him with handwritten notes. "I'm prepared to offer you a final settlement, a very generous one, in exchange for your complete discretion permanently, and any souvenirs you might have kept from your time with your former benefactor." Serafina laughed, a low, melodious sound that sent shivers down Eleanor's spine. "A final settlement. Julian, darling, our arrangement is for life. Or have you forgotten the terms?" "I haven't forgotten anything," Julian said, his voice hardening. "But if this divorce turns ugly, and it will if you don't cooperate, my entire financial situation becomes public record. My lawyers are advising full disclosure on certain past indiscretions to mitigate damage. Your leverage disappears if I'm the one telling the story. Think about it, Serafina. A substantial clean break, or a protracted messy war where your value plummets along with mine." There was a long silence on the other end. Eleanor held her breath. "You wouldn't dare," Serafina finally said, but the confidence in her voice had faltered slightly. "Try me." Julian bluffed, his voice surprisingly steady. "I have a child to think about. My priorities have shifted. How substantial a settlement are we discussing?" Serafina asked, her tone now purely transactional. The negotiation had begun. The negotiations with Serafina Dubois were fraught and conducted over several encrypted calls and through intermediaries, lawyers who specialized in the kind of shadowy agreements that never saw the light of day. Serafina was a shrewd opponent. She pushed for an astronomical sum, initially refusing to surrender the souvenirs Julian so desperately wanted back. Documents, recordings, perhaps even photographs that detailed his early questionable business dealings. Julian, coached by Chloe and a grimly determined Eleanor, who despite her pain showed an unexpected aptitude for strategic thinking, held firm on their maximum offer. It was still a fortune enough to keep Serafina in Parisian luxury for the rest of her days, but significantly less than she had likely extracted over the years. And critically, it came with the demand for the return of all incriminating materials and an ironclad NDA. The threat of Julian preemptively disclosing his past, thus devaluing her collateral, was their main weapon. During this tense period, Eleanor focused on her own future. She moved out of the Park Avenue penthouse and into a comfortable, light-filled apartment Chloe had helped her find on the Upper West Side, a place that felt like hers, untainted by Julian's deceit. She hired her own financial advisor, began therapy, and concentrated on her pregnancy, finding solace in the rhythmic kicks of her unborn son. The anger was still there, a dull ache, but it was now channeled into a fierce, protective instinct and a resolve to build a new life. The turning point with Serafina came when Chloe, through Michael Rourke's continued investigations, uncovered a crucial piece of leverage. Serafina Dubois wasn't her real name. She was born Sofia Petrova in a bleak industrial town in Eastern Europe, and there were whispers of a less than glamorous past she had worked very hard to erase, a past that, if revealed, could tarnish the sophisticated mystique she had so carefully cultivated. Moreover, Rourke found evidence that Serafina hadn't just been a passive observer of her former patron's dealings. She'd been a more active participant than she let on, potentially implicating her in some of his less savory activities. Armed with this new information, Chloe advised Julian to make one final firm offer, hinting that if Serafina didn't accept certain details about her past and her deeper involvement with her deceased mentor, might find their way to interested authorities in Monaco and France. It was a taste of her own medicine. Serafina, pragmatic to the core and realizing her carefully constructed world was at risk, finally capitulated. A clandestine meeting was arranged in Geneva. Julian, accompanied by a stoic Marcus Thorne as a witness and to verify the returned materials, met Serafina. Eleanor, advised by Chloe, stayed in New York. She had no desire to see the woman who had haunted her marriage. According to Marcus's later account, Serafina was as poised and icily beautiful as ever. She handed over a sleek encrypted hard drive and a single ornate antique key, presumably to a safe deposit box. The transaction was swift, clinical. The Lloyd's insurance policy on her hands was to be terminated, its surrender value, minus penalties, forming part of her settlement. "It was a profitable performance, Julian," Serafina reportedly said, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips as she signed the final papers. "But every show must end." With that, she walked out of his life, a wealthy woman, but one stripped of her primary source of power over him. For Julian, the relief was palpable, but it was overshadowed by the ruins of his personal life. The divorce proceeded. Eleanor, guided by Chloe, negotiated a settlement that was fair and ensured her and her son's financial security. But it was far from the punitive sum she could have demanded had she chosen to expose Julian's past entirely. She didn't want his complete destruction. She wanted peace and a clean break. She also insisted on a clause that any future financial distress Julian might face due to his past dealings would not impact his child support obligations, which were to be placed in a secure trust. A few months later, Eleanor gave birth to a healthy baby boy, whom she named Ethan. Holding him in her arms, she felt a profound sense of hope and purpose that had nothing to do with Julian Vance or the life she had lost. Ethan was her future, her focus. Julian, humbled and diminished, tried to be a father. He visited Ethan regularly, his interactions with Eleanor polite but strained. The charismatic swagger was gone, replaced by a more somber, reflective demeanor. His empire had survived largely due to Serafina's silence and Eleanor's discretion, but he was a changed man, forever marked by the scandal that had nearly cost him everything. He finally paid all outstanding prenatal bills directly to Eleanor, along with a handwritten letter of apology that felt for the first time somewhat sincere. It was a small gesture in the grand scheme of things, but for Eleanor it closed a painful chapter. She never heard from Serafina Dubois again. Occasionally she would see a paparazzi photo of her at some far-flung resort, always impeccably dressed, always alone. The famous hands were usually adorned with new extravagant rings, but they no longer held any power over Eleanor's life. Eleanor thrived. She returned to her passion for art, starting a small online consultancy, her eye for talent as sharp as ever. She was a devoted mother, her world revolving around Ethan's smiles and milestones. The pain of Julian's betrayal never entirely vanished, but it transformed into a scar, a reminder of her strength and resilience. She had walked through fire and emerged not unscathed, but whole and free. The gilded cage was a distant memory, replaced by a life of authentic joy and hard-won independence. Her son would know a mother who was not only a survivor, but a quiet victor. The story of the millionaire who insured his mistress's hands while his pregnant wife's prenatal bills went unpaid became a cautionary tale whispered in certain circles, a testament to the destructive power of deceit and the quiet strength of a woman scorned, but ultimately reborn. Eleanor Vance had found out, and in doing so, she had found herself. And so Eleanor rebuilt her life brick by painful brick, transforming betrayal into a foundation for a stronger future. Julian learned a hard lesson about priorities and Serafina. Well, she walked away with her fortune, but perhaps lost something more valuable in the process. This story is a stark reminder that secrets always have a price, and sometimes the most unassuming person finds the strength to make the powerful pay. What did you think of Eleanor's journey? Could you have been as strong? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story of drama, resilience, and ultimate justice resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who loves a gripping tale, and most importantly, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into the world of high-stakes human drama. We've got so many more stories to tell. Thanks for listening.